Hey guys, Professor Brown here, and in this video I'm going to go over some of the equipment and safety considerations you need for the Chemistry 152 online kit. Here in this photograph, the first we have is the hardware that you're going to be using for the Chemistry 152 online section, and I want to go over some of the correct names for this materials and what they are typically used for in the lab. So first is this guy right here. That is a 250 milliliter beaker with some test tubes down inside. The test tubes will be for the melting point lab later on in the semester, but I wanted to point out the beaker because beakers are used for transferring liquids from one place to another. Beakers are not used for measuring the amount of liquid that you have. I know there is a measuring scale on the side of the beaker, but beakers measuring scales are for approximation. They are not for fine measuring of volumes. If you need to measure the exact liquid amount of a liquid, then you will want to use one of the two graduated cylinders pictured here. The taller one is a 50 milliliter graduated cylinder, good for measuring volumes between 10 and about 50 milliliters. The smaller one is a 10 milliliter graduated cylinder, good for measuring volumes between 1 and 10 milliliters. Use accordingly. The two pieces of glass that you see in the photo and in your lab kit are what we refer to as Erlenmeyer flasks. One will be used for the molar mass lab, the very first lab, the big one, the 125 milliliter flask. The smaller one is used for many of the titration labs that we find toward the end of the class. We will also use the 10 milliliter syringe here for the titrations. That will be used to deliver sodium hydroxide to your acidic solutions. We also have a piece of tubing for the ideal gas lab, as well as an empty 10 to 15 milliliter bottle that you will use for the ideal gas lab. We have a thermometer that's used for many of the labs. Please do your best to keep the case on the thermometer. That helps keep them from getting broke. Of course, you'll have to take it out to use it, but make sure you don't displace the case as you use it. Finally, but not least, we have our balance. Our balance is used for measuring mass, and I'll give you a few tips and pointers on that in the next couple of photos. Here we have a picture of the balance, or some of the balances that you will receive in the kits. Some of them may look a little different, but for the most part, this is what the balance looks like. On the big silver tray there is where you put the material that you want to weigh, and then we have a few buttons that help us along the way. Of course, we have the on-off button. Hopefully you can determine what that does for you. It turns the balance on and off. Also, we have a mode button. The mode button will switch between different units of measure. Everything in our lab should be measured in grams, so you should always see a little G up there as you measure your materials. Keep in mind, these scales only have a capacity of about 200 grams, so don't put a lot of heavy stuff on the scales and break it, please. Finally, we have the tare button here. Tare button is a really useful button on a balance. It zeroes out things for you so that you can use weighing dishes without including them in the weight. On the next slide, we'll look at a weighing dish on the balance and talk about why it's important for us to use them. So as I was saying, here on this slide, we have a picture of a weigh boat on a balance, and the balance is reading 0.00 grams. We want to weigh things in our weigh boat for a couple of reasons. First of all, it helps keep our balance clean. Some of the salts that we use will rapidly enhance rusting, and we notice that we have a nice metal tray that we set our samples on top of our balance. And so if we spill a bunch of salt all over our balance, we tend to get them rusty, and they quit working faster than they would if we strive to keep it clean. Furthermore, we contain all of the material that we measure by keeping it in a weigh boat. If we try to put solid salt, powdery salt up on our balance, we will inevitably spill some as we go to transfer it from one place to another. So we always use a weigh boat when we are weighing on a balance. To get the balance to read 000 with the weigh boat on it, as you see here, you simply place the weigh boat on the balance with it turned on. Certainly a mass will pop up. The weigh boats weigh a gram and some change, I believe. And so 1 point something something should pop up here in the screen. We want to not measure that. So what we do is we hit the tare button there after we've placed the weigh boat on the balance and let it stabilize. That will reset it to 0, and then we can put whatever we want into the weigh boat, only measuring the material that we place. This is the proper way to use a balance. Here on this slide, we have the liquids that you receive in your 152 online lab kit. I want to go over some of the safety considerations for each of these directly. The first one that we see there is the volatile organic chemical. The volatile organic liquid is either an alcohol or hydrocarbon liquid. These are slightly toxic compounds. You would not want to ingest them. And however, the most major safety consideration for these guys is that they are all flammable. Both the liquid and the vapors will catch fire. You actually use this chemical in an experiment that requires you to put a small amount of this liquid into a flask and then insert the flask into boiling water in order to evaporate it. They evaporate really well, and it's why we use these liquids for this experiment. However, I want you to make sure that the large bottle of this stuff is away from any ignition sources, the burner in the stove, any flames or matches or lighters. This stuff will catch fire. Its vapors will catch fire if you are not careful. So make sure when you are using the volatile organic liquid that you keep it away from any sparks, open flames, or hot oven elements. The second bottle that we see there is acetic acid unknown. Now, acetic acid is what us in the business call vinegar. That is the chemical name for household vinegar, if you will. Notice it is an acid, meaning that if you get it on your skin after a sufficient enough time, it will leave some burns. Obviously, acetic acid is non-toxic. However, our solution here is somewhat stronger than household vinegar. If you get this on your hands, it's not going to burn right away, but you may notice it burning a short time afterwards. Rinsing well with water would do away with this. You may be left with a red mark or something like that, but you should be okay. On the flip side, we have 1 molar sodium hydroxide. This is a rather basic solution. Sodium hydroxide is what we typically think of when we think of drain cleaner. So you can kind of think of how the action of that might work. It dissolves organic fats and greases, much like the stuff that's found on your skin. So sodium hydroxide is rather caustic. It will also burn you if you are to get it onto your hands or especially your eyes. We want to make sure that we are diligently wearing our eye protection when working with these substances. Again, it's not necessarily toxic or poisonous, but it can leave burns. So if you get any on your skin, rinse well with water, and you may want to take precautions for avoiding skin contact altogether. The last 2 solutions that we have are pH indicators. These will be used for our titrations in order to see the color change when we get to different pH ranges. These substances are substances that are dissolved in ethanol. So along with the volatile organic liquid, these are also flammable liquids. Keep them away from any heat, sparks, or open flames. In addition, it is suspected that the phenolphthalein and the indicators used in Bogen's Universal indicators are carcinogenic or can cause cancer via high amounts of exposure. While we don't use large amounts of these chemicals, large enough amounts that I would be concerned about them giving you cancer over one or two instances, I do recommend that you take steps to avoid having these spill on your hands. Now, of course, they're already in dropper bottles and you're only using drops at a time, but you may want to wear a pair of gloves or at least use a towel or a napkin as you dispense these into your solutions. When you get done with them, even if you don't get any on your hands, I suggest washing your hands really, really well, as I would with any lab, but especially with those, wash your hands really well after handling. Those are the major safety considerations for the liquids that are acquired in your 152 online lab kit. Here on this slide, we have the solids that are included with your 152 lab kit. They are lauric acid, benzoic acid, calcium chloride, and ammonium chloride. Lauric acid and benzoic acid are common materials found in many soaps and other beauty products on our store shelves today. And even though we may apply them in those manners, keep in mind these are acidic substances and they are in pure form. Now, they are not going to burn you if you get them on your skin directly in a quick manner. If they sat there, they would irritate your skin over a small amount of time. So I just suggest do not allow these to sit on the skin. You may want to use a pair of gloves while you work with them, or just make sure you wash your hands really well if you get any of the material on you. The other two solids are calcium chloride and ammonium chloride. These will be used for your calorimetry experiment. They are not to be ingested as with any of the other chemicals in the lab kit. They can be slightly toxic. And in addition, the calcium chloride, for some of you, there's two different forms that it comes in. Some will get a really, really fine powder of the calcium chloride. And I just want to emphasize that really fine powder can be rather irritating to the skin. It may cause some rash or some burning if you allow it to sit on your skin. So I would, again, maybe find a pair of gloves to wear while you handle the calcium chloride. The ammonium chloride is a little bit easier to handle. It doesn't seem to fly around as much, and it doesn't really burn if you get it on your hands. However, as with all the rest of them, I suggest washing your hands really, really, really well when you get done handling these chemicals. Finally, you are given a couple of packs of Alka-Seltzer. You will need those for the experiment. Do not take them for heartburn implications. You will need them for your experiments. We don't take anything, regardless of how it's packaged, in a lab kit. So don't use it as medicine thinking you'll replace it later. Those are the solids that you will use in the 152 section. Notice I put the scupula and the weigh boats in the picture to remind you that those pieces of equipment are useful for measuring and transferring all of these solids. Here we have just some generic lab safety considerations. I want to make sure that when you take your pictures, these rules are being followed. So pay close attention to some of the things that you want to be sure of as you're performing these labs. Number one, and first and foremost, always, always, always use eye protection when performing your labs. If you're not wearing eye protection when you take your pictures, you will not get credit for the lab. So always use some form of eye protection. I'm fine with safety glasses or even prescription glasses, as long as something is in front of your eyes while you are performing these labs. Always keep your station clean and organized. Keep any other materials out of the way. You want a nice open space to work in while you are performing your labs. Keep all food and drink. This includes any water bottles as well. Clear of your station. You don't want to make the mistake of picking up something you thought was food or drink and drinking it and turning out that's one of our lab materials. Keep all food and drink clear of your station. Make sure to keep your children and any pets clear of your station. Some of these could spill on them, could especially get in their eyes or something like that, and could cause some damage. We all know children and pets can be unpredictable and rambunctious, so please keep them away while you are performing your lab exercises. Always, when you are performing a lab, wear well-fitting clothes, and that just means don't have like real baggy blouses, dangly sleeves, and stuff like that while you're performing your labs. Also, I would be sure to wear clothes that I don't mind messing up. You don't have a lot of chemicals in these labs, but the ones that are there could stain, and some of the acids could possibly put a hole in some of these clothes. So I wouldn't wear anything I was real proud of while I was performing the labs. No dangly jewelry. Again, some of the acids and bases can tarnish your jewelry, even pit it somewhat. So I would suggest not wearing any jewelry that I really cared about while I'm performing these labs. No smoking or vaping while you're performing the labs. You don't want to be putting things up to your mouth. Some of the chemicals, as already described, are flammable. So there's good reason for no smoking while performing the labs. If you have long hair, you will probably want to tie it back while you are working with the chemicals. In the lab, that's especially considerate for when we have open flames. Here, you don't want your hair falling into any of the chemicals and not realizing it and not having the chance to wash it out. So make sure your hair is tied back and secured is the best way to do that. And finally, as I've already said a few times, make sure when you get done with the lab, even if you wore gloves, even if you don't think you got anything on you, always wash your hands very, very well when you are done. If you follow these generic kind of lab safety and make sure that you are really focusing while you're doing the labs, there shouldn't be any incidents while you're performing these labs. One last time for emphasis, if you've never heard the story of Carol here, our friend Carol never wore her safety goggles and now she doesn't need them. You've not been in a proper chemistry lab until you've seen the Carol posters. So there you go. Again, I do expect that every one of these labs is performed with eye protection on. If you are not wearing eye protection in the pictures that you take of you performing the labs, you will not receive credit for that lab. So be sure before you start to find yourself some eye protection of some sort. If you are not sure if you have adequate eye protection or not, give me an email, send me a picture, I'll respond real quickly with a yay or a nay. Hey, that works. Hey, that doesn't. Find something better. Please let me know if you have any questions about the safety of any of the materials, if there's any extra information you would like to know, if you would like some feedback or some suggestions on how to safely perform any of the experiments, please email me before you do so. I will be more than happy to help you with that information. This concludes the safety video for the 152 lab section. Be safe out there as you perform your lab experiments.